Have you ever seen someone push away the very thing they secretly crave? I'm talking about the moment things get close, intimate, real. And instead of leaning in, they flinch. They pull back. They suddenly become cold, distant, irritated, or even disappear. And you're left spinning in confusion, wondering what just happened. That is not rejection. That is not detachment. That is not disinterest. That is the battlefield of a deeply conflicted mind. And most people miss it. When an avoidant starts acting distant after a moment of connection, that's the first smoke signal of real love breaking through their defense system. This isn't someone who's uninterested. This is someone who's terrified that they're finally starting to care. Their nervous system wasn't built for closeness. Their heart has been trained to equate vulnerability with danger. So the moment they start to feel something genuine, boom, their mind slams the brakes, the walls come up, their emotional reflexes to run. Not because you did something wrong, but because for the first time, something finally felt right. Think about that. Most people interpret withdrawal as rejection. But in avoidant psychology, withdrawal is often a signal that they're feeling too much, not too little. They were never taught to sit with emotional intimacy. They were taught to escape it. Their body literally enters fight or flight mode when real love starts to emerge. They panic not because they don't want it, but because they never learned how to hold it without losing themselves. That internal conflict is violent. It's primal. It's like trying to hug someone who has been trained their whole life that touch means danger. They flinch. They pull back. They might even lash out. But that reflex doesn't mean they don't want love. It means they're still trying to survive it. And here's the twist. The more powerful the bond, the more intense the withdrawal. The avoidant who doesn't care will be polite, casual, non-reactive. But the avoidant who's falling for you, they'll act up. Their emotional armor starts rattling. They'll say things they don't mean, do things that confuse you, because they're stuck between two opposing forces. The need for connection and the fear of abandonment. That tug-of-war plays out in erratic behavior. Hot and cold, closeness followed by retreat. But all of it, every strange reaction, every disappearance, every passive-aggressive move is just one message trying to break through, I'm scared, I care. Now listen closely, because this is where most people screw it up. When someone withdraws, we instinctively chase. We try to soothe, fix, explain. But when you do that with an avoidant, it only reinforces their fear that love means losing control. They retreat even further. The truth is, the moment you stop forcing connection is the moment they start feeling the impact of their emotions. Your stillness becomes the mirror that shows them their own chaos. And if they're in love, that silence will haunt them. It will activate them. Because now they're left alone, not with peace, but with the feelings they tried to run from. And that's the moment of truth. When the avoidant begins to realize that the connection wasn't the threat, their fear was that you weren't the danger. Their unresolved wounds were. And love, real love, isn't about control or escape. It's about having the courage to stay despite your fear. The people who are hardest to love are often the ones who need it the most. Not in a savior complex kind of way, but in the sense that they've been running from their own heart for so long they no longer recognize its voice. You become the first mirror that reflects their buried humanity. And for some, that will be too much. They'll bolt, convince themselves you were never the one. But for others, the ones truly ready to confront themselves, that discomfort will lead to awakening. That fear will lead to transformation. That resistance will give way to vulnerability. So if you've ever been confused by an avoidant pulling away right when things started to feel real, don't take it personally. Take it as proof. Proof that you struck something deeper than attraction. Proof that love is trying to emerge through the cracks of their fear. But don't chase them. Don't try to fix them. Let your stillness speak louder than their chaos. Because sometimes the most powerful message you can send to a scared heart is that you're not afraid to let it figure itself out. Real love doesn't chase chaos, it holds space for clarity. And if they're really in love with you, they'll stop running long enough to see that. You know what's fascinating? The way avoidants try to convince themselves they've moved on, all while orbiting your world like a ghost in the algorithm. They won't text you directly, they won't say they miss you, but they'll watch your stories. They'll like your old posts. They'll suddenly pop up in places they never cared about before. And you think, why now? What does this mean? Let me tell you. When an avoidant starts reappearing in small, subtle digital ways, it's not because they're bored, it's because they can't escape you. See, most people think love looks like presents, calls, texts, big romantic gestures. But with avoidance, love shows up in the spaces they don't know how to fill, in the quiet moments they thought would bring peace, but instead bring obsession. When you step back, when you stop initiating, that's when their mind starts doing the one thing they've been trained to avoid: feel. They start wondering where you went, who you're with, why you're suddenly absent. And here's the kicker: they won't confront you about it. They won't admit they're spiraling. They'll just circle, watch, linger, lurk. Because for them, that distance you've created becomes a trigger. It reactivates every unprocessed emotion they've spent years burying. And the more they care, the more silent their approach becomes. Not because they don't feel it, but because they don't know what to do with what they're feeling. An avoidant doesn't return to you in obvious ways. They don't confess love on a random Tuesday morning. They don't send you long texts pouring out their soul. They poke the connection. They test the waters without getting wet. They might send a meme, comment on something indirect, ask a completely irrelevant question just to see if you'll respond. And if you do, they'll pull back again, because now the fear returns. But if you don't, they stay stuck in their emotional limbo, wondering why your silence feels heavier than your presence ever did. That's what people misunderstand. Avoidants don't want to be alone. They just fear being consumed. So when you go silent, their illusion of control starts to crack. You're no longer chasing, no longer reacting, and suddenly they realize they're not indifferent, they're haunted. Haunted by thoughts they can't delete, by feelings they can't suppress. They thought cutting contact would free them, but instead it enslaved them to the echo of the very connection they tried to escape. Understand this: when an avoidant reappears in your world indirectly, it's a psychological leak. Their mind is trying to reestablish emotional contact without confronting emotional vulnerability. They want proximity without risk, access without accountability. But that in itself is a confession that reappearance is not coincidence. It's the result of emotional gravity. You've taken your energy back, and now they're feeling the vacuum. And trust me, that vacuum is deafening. What's even more powerful is that they don't know why they keep thinking about you. That's what makes it even more real. It's involuntary, intrusive. They try to distract themselves with work, with people, with noise. But your absence has carved out a space they can't refill. You've imprinted on their psyche, not because you chased, but because you withdrew with dignity. And in that silence, they begin to realize you mattered more than they admitted. This is where your power lies, not in chasing, not in explaining, but in letting your stillness reveal what their mind has been trying to suppress. You don't have to perform to be remembered. You don't have to beg to be valued. When an avoidant starts orbiting your world after you've walked away, it means one thing: your presence disrupted their avoidance. You didn't just touch their heart, you disturbed their emotional system. And here's what separates the people who grow from the ones who self-destruct: what they do next. Some avoidants will double down. They'll ghost you harder, run faster, bear their feelings deeper. But the ones who are ready, they'll stop pretending. They'll move past digital breadcrumbs into the real conversation. They'll show up scared but honest. And that's when transformation begins. But none of that can happen if you keep breaking your own silence. If you keep reinitiating the connection, you have to let your absence become the lesson. Let them feel what it's like to lose access to your soul. That's not manipulation, that's mirror work. And you're not punishing them. You're giving them the space to recognize what they tried to suppress, because sometimes the only way for an avoidant to realize they're in love is to lose the one person who made them feel safe enough to feel again. Don't chase the breadcrumb trail. Let them find their way back to the table. If love is real, silence will become the loudest wake-up call they've ever heard. Now here's where most people get completely thrown off. The moment the avoidant starts trying to control the rhythm of the connection, the pacing suddenly shifts. Responses slow down, energy drops, texts feel flat, plans become vague. It's like they went from full presence to partial ghost. And you start thinking, did I do something wrong? Are they losing interest? But that's not what's happening. This isn't about you. This is about them trying to manage the emotional storm inside their own mind. What looks like disinterest is actually self-preservation. Avoidants are masters of regulating intensity, not because they want to hurt you, but because they're terrified of drowning in something they can't control. So when they start falling for you, when the emotions become real, when the bond starts to activate all their buried longing, they reach for the only defense mechanism they know: control. They can't control their feelings, so they try to control the pace. They need to feel like they're in the driver's seat, even if they're steering directly into emotional paralysis. You have to understand this at a psychological level. Love for an avoidant doesn't feel like safety. It feels like exposure, raw, vulnerable, unprotected. And when someone's entire survival system has been built around emotional distance, real closeness triggers alarms. It's not the person they're afraid of. It's the intimacy. It's the unfiltered, uncontrolled, unpredictable nature of being seen. And when you show up in a way that penetrates their defenses, when you meet them with consistency, presence, and emotional truth, they panic. So what do? They start rationing connection, delaying responses, pushing back plans, talking in circles. It's not to punish you. It's to regain psychological control. Because if they let the relationship flow naturally, their feelings will take the wheel. And if their feelings take over, they fear losing their identity, their freedom, their stability. The emotional floodgates open, and that's terrifying to someone who spent a lifetime building dams. This is where it gets really deceptive. Their cold behavior can make you believe you've done something wrong. It tempts you to overcorrect, to chase, to accommodate. But the moment you start adjusting to their pace out of fear, the dynamic becomes imbalanced. They feel in control again, but not because of love, because of power. And ironically, that makes them feel even less safe, because now the connection isn't based on truth, it's based on fear of loss. This is why so many avoidant relationships become emotionally chaotic. The avoidant needs to slow down to feel safe, but the partner often misinterprets this as rejection and pushes harder, which only reinforces the avoidant's need to escape. It becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. And neither person knows how they got there. But here's the breakthrough. When an avoidant starts controlling the pace, it doesn't mean the love isn't real. It means the fear is. That internal tug-of-war between desire and danger is raging at full volume. Their slow replies are not a lack of interest, they're an emotional buffer, a safety net, a way to breathe. And oddly enough, the more they love you, the more they need to slow things down. Not because they don't want the connection, but because they're afraid they'll lose themselves inside of it. You cannot force them to match your rhythm. That's the mistake people make. They try to speed up the healing. They try to drag them into deeper vulnerability before that nervous system is ready to tolerate it. But emotional growth is not about pressure. It's about capacity. And if their capacity isn't there yet, your urgency will only trigger retreat. So what's the answer? It's simple, but not easy. Respect the pacing without abandoning your standards. Hold the boundary without making it a wall. Don't chase, but don't disappear either. Stay grounded. Stay clear. Make space for them to feel safe without compromising your own sense of self. That balance, that inner solidity, is what eventually shows them they don't have to control everything to be okay. Because when they start realizing you're not trying to possess them, you're not trying to trap them, you're not trying to invade them, you're simply showing up as you are, consistently, honestly, unshakably, it starts to rewire something deep inside. And that's when transformation becomes possible. But it begins when you stop reacting to the shift in pace as a sign of failure and start seeing it for what it is, a cry for safety from a nervous system still learning how to love. You don't need to force the connection to move faster. You just need to stand still long enough for them to realize they're not running from you, they're running from the version of themselves that's finally learning how to feel. One of the biggest misconceptions people have about avoidance is that they don't care, that they're cold, emotionless, detached. But let me tell you something that will change the way you see them forever. They care more than you think. They just don't show it in ways the world easily recognizes, especially when it comes to jealousy. You won't catch an avoidant blowing up your phone with accusations. They won't ask, "Who were you with?" or "Why didn't you call me back?" That's too obvious, too vulnerable, too risky. Because to express jealousy would mean admitting emotional investment, and that terrifies them. So they suppress it, they play it cool, they act like nothing bothers them. But underneath that still surface, there's a volcano of unspoken emotion. Here's how it really works. If an avoidant starts to develop feelings for you, their emotional radar sharpens, especially when they sense someone else might be getting your attention. But they won't confront you. Instead, they'll observe. They'll start paying attention to who you talk about. They'll go silent when you mention other people. They'll give short responses when you talk about someone of the opposite sex. They won't say it, but they feel it. And those reactions, those shifts in energy, are the unspoken proof that something deeper is happening inside them. The truth is, their jealousy is indirect, because direct communication feels like a loss of control. Vulnerability to them is dangerous territory, so instead of expressing it, they'll show it in their body language, the micro tensions, the sudden mood changes, the way they withdraw, not because they don't care, but because they care too much and don't know what to do with that energy. If you watch closely, if you're emotionally intelligent enough to see past the silence, you'll notice a pattern. When your attention drifts, their walls get higher, but their eyes stay locked. You see, emotional detachment is not the opposite of love. Indifference is. And the avoidant who starts acting cold, snappy, or passive-aggressive when you mention someone else, that's not indifference. That's guarded attachment. That's a person trying to shield their heart while pretending they don't have one. But why is this important? Because it exposes a deeper truth about their wiring. Avoidants aren't incapable of love. They're afraid of it. So when jealousy creeps in, it becomes the one emotion that betrays the lie they've been telling themselves. That they don't care, that they're detached, that they're fine. Jealousy to them is a crack in the mask, a breach in the wall. And once it shows up, they're no longer just managing their emotions, they're fighting them. That's why it's so powerful when you, as the emotionally aware one, don't react to the jealousy, but recognize it. You don't weaponize it. You don't provoke it. You don't play games with it. Instead, you observe it the same way they're observing you. With clarity, with calm, and with compassion. Because now you're not just looking at their behavior, you're seeing the root underneath it, a human being torn between the fear of losing you and the fear of needing you too much. When an avoidant starts to show signs of possessiveness, even subtly, you're not just witnessing insecurity. You're witnessing emotional exposure. That's their heart saying, "I'm scared you'll leave," but it comes out as distance, sarcasm, control. It's their love language, distorted by fear. And this is where you hold your power, because instead of reacting, instead of shrinking, instead of explaining yourself to soothe their unspoken jealousy, you anchor into your own self-worth. You don't perform to reassure them. You don't tiptoe around their triggers. You just become a mirror. And that mirror reflects something they haven't seen in a long time. Someone who's not playing games, but who also won't shrink just to make them feel safe. That kind of grounded presence is what starts to heal an avoidant from the inside out. Not pity, not people-pleasing, presence. Because now they're not just feeling jealousy, they're realizing it points to something real. And the more they feel it, the more undeniable the connection becomes. So don't let the silence fool you. Don't let the cool exterior trick you. When an avoidant gets jealous, they're not showing weakness, they're showing the first crack in the emotional armor. And it's in that crack that love starts to seep in. The avoidant won't say, I want you, but they'll feel it in every space where someone else could have you. And when you learn to read the silence, you realize their love was never absent. It was just afraid to speak. There's a moment, quiet, subtle, but powerful, when an avoidant begins to do something that even they don't fully understand. They start to open up. And I'm not talking about superficial conversation. I'm talking about those rare moments when they let the past leak through. When the cracks in their emotional armor show just enough for you to glimpse something deeper. It could be a passing comment about their childhood, a vague reference to someone who hurt them, a half laugh when they admit they don't trust easily. Most people miss it, but if you're paying attention, you realize this isn't casual. This is a confession in code. Avoidants don't speak in emotional paragraphs. They speak in fragments, in carefully edited glimpses. They don't hand you the whole truth. They give you pieces and watch what you do with them. Because for someone who's built their whole emotional survival around protection, vulnerability feels like stepping onto a battlefield without armor. It's terrifying. And yet, when love starts to sneak in, something in them wants to be seen, even if it's just for a second. So when an avoidant starts sharing about their past, especially their emotional past, you're witnessing something rare. You're not just getting information. You're being invited into a space they rarely open for anyone. Because those stories aren't just memories. They're the blueprint of why they are the way they are. The reasons behind their detachment, the silent explanations for their push-pull behavior, and by giving you access to that space, they're testing the one thing they fear the most: trust. They want to know, can you hold it? Will you judge me? Will you use it against me later? Or will you sit with it without trying to fix it, without rushing to analyze it, just witnessing it with respect? Because that's the thing most people don't realize about avoidance. Their avoidance isn't just about fear of closeness. It's fear of being misunderstood once they finally do open up. And unfortunately, many of them have been conditioned to believe that vulnerability always comes at a price. So when they give you a glimpse into their past, they're not just reminiscing, they're extending emotional credit on a system that's been overdrawn for years. But here's the key. They don't open up to just anyone. In fact, most avoidants can go years, even decades, without revealing their emotional core. They can be charming, polite, funny, intelligent, but still keep people miles away from anything real. So when they choose to open up to you, even if it's brief, even if it's messy, it means you've touched something they didn't expect to feel. You've made them want to risk connection. And no, they won't always do it cleanly. Sometimes they'll overshare and then withdraw. Sometimes they'll share a deep truth and then disappear for days. That's not emotional manipulation, that's emotional overwhelm. Because now they're not just feeling exposed, they're wondering if they just made a mistake. And your response in that moment becomes everything. You don't have to solve their pain. You don't have to psychoanalyze their trauma. You just have to stay calm, present, real. Let them see that their darkness didn't scare you, that their wounds didn't make you flinch, that you're not here to save them, but you're also not here to abandon them the moment things get complicated. That kind of presence is what starts to rewire the nervous system of an avoidant. Because now, vulnerability isn't just a risk, it becomes a new possibility. A space where their story can be seen, not exploited. A connection where their flaws aren't fatal, but human. And once they experience that with you, everything changes. They might not say, I love you the traditional way, but that moment they open up, that's their version of I trust you. And in the world of an avoidant, trust is love's native language. So when they let you in, even for a second, don't miss it. Don't overlook it, because it didn't come with flowers or fireworks. That tiny window into their heart might be the most honest, vulnerable act they've done in years, and it's not random. It means they see you as someone safe, someone different, someone worth risking the story they've spent a lifetime guarding. Because when an avoidant starts to share their past, what they're really saying is, I'm afraid of love, but with you, I'm starting to believe it might be possible. Silence has power, but most people underestimate just how loud silence becomes in the mind of someone who's been running from their feelings, especially an avoidant. When you stop reaching out, when you stop explaining yourself, when you go quiet, not out of manipulation, but from a place of grounded self-respect, something shifts. Not in you, in them. An avoidant spends most of their emotional life trying to maintain control. Control of connection. Control of their environment. Control of how close people can get. And as long as you're reaching out, as long as you're chasing, they stay in control. But the moment you go silent, the illusion collapses. The power dynamic flips. And absence, when feelings are real, becomes a torment. You'd think your silence would bring them peace. That's what they wanted, right? Space. Room to breathe. Time to think. But here's the truth they never expected. Silence doesn't bring them relief. It brings them clarity. And for an avoidant who's secretly in love, that clarity is brutal. Because now they're sitting in the very emptiness they tried to create and realizing it's not freedom, it's loneliness. At first, they'll try to distract themselves, they'll bury it in work, they'll scroll mindlessly, they'll pretend it's fine, but the mind has a way of circling back, especially when there's emotional weight involved. And little by little, they begin to unravel. Not publicly, quietly, internally. You won't see it, but it's happening. The questions start to build. Why did she start reaching out? Did she move on? Did I push her too far? Why does this feel so heavy? You've become a question they can't answer, a presence they can't access. And that psychological uncertainty begins to replace the emotional control they once had. You're not just a memory now. You're an activation point. Your silence is no longer a gap, it's a mirror. And it's reflecting back everything they've been avoiding, their fear, their longing, their guilt, their desire. And most of all, the reality that their defenses cost them something real. And this is what breaks the narrative they've clung to. The story that they don't care, that they're better off alone, that they didn't need you. Because if that were true, your silence wouldn't echo so loudly in their mind. But it does. Because despite all their efforts to stay detached, to stay in control, they're now experiencing the very emotion they never wanted to admit, love that won't leave quietly. Here's what most people miss. The avoidant doesn't unravel when you speak. They unravel when you stop. Not because you're punishing them, but because you've withdrawn the emotional energy they were unconsciously relying on. You were the connection they feared, and now you're the silence they can't escape. And that silence begins to crack their emotional walls in a way nothing else ever could. They might not show it, they might not reach out, but internally they're spiraling because now they have to sit with the consequences of their own emotional limitations. And if the love is real, and if they've done even a fraction of the inner work, they will feel it deeply, painfully. And they'll realize they didn't push away a problem, they pushed away a possibility. And that's where the awakening begins. For some avoidants, this is the exact pressure that breaks the old pattern, that forces them to confront themselves, to admit, I cared more than I let on. I didn't know how to hold it, but it was real. And that realization, that's the beginning of transformation. Not always instantly, not always with a fairy tale ending, but it's real. And it only happens when the silence is allowed to